Welcome back to the Word on Fire Institute lecture series, The Idolatry of Identity, Progressive Wokeist Ideology, and the Catholic Response. The previous lecture ended by highlighting two modifications progressivism has made to post-colonial theory. One, dividing the moral, cultural, and political worlds into two and only two categories of people, the oppressors versus the oppressed, which can be restated as the bad guys versus the good guys. And two, endowing those who define themselves as oppressed or representing the oppressed full authority to determine what is good, bad, right, and wrong based only on the circular appeal to their lived experiences. These two progressive modifications of post-colonial theory are palpable in the contemporary Black Lives Matter political movement, or, as it is frequently referred to, BLM. Now, it is vital to emphasize that I am analyzing and critiquing the political action organization Black Lives Matter in this lecture, not the substance of the words Black Lives Matter. Indeed, having to make a disclaimer like this, clarifying that, like all Catholics and people of goodwill, I unequivocally support the substance of the statement, Black Lives Matter, has been one of the cunningly clever tools that BLM, the advocacy group, has employed to shield itself from criticism. For those inclined by fear or self-interest or cynicism, the charge can be made, and indeed has repeatedly been made, that critiquing BLM is tantamount to critiquing the statement, Black Lives Matter, which would imply that the critic is a racist and therefore can be denounced and removed from society as a moral pariah. This strategy is one of the bluntest yet most destructive in BLM's arsenal. Unfortunately, it's effective, or at least it has been. Yet it also remains the case that it is a lie. It is indeed possible to champion the equal dignity of all Black individuals while criticizing the organization Black Lives Matter as a progressive appropriation of post-colonialism, which is exactly what this lecture intends to do. The Black Lives Matter movement is largely decentralized both in the United States and globally, mostly operating on a localized franchise model. However, it maintains a central organizational website that states the movement's aims, keeps tabs on relevant issues in the news, always covered from a racial angle, highlights opportunities to support the movement, and sells official Black Lives Matter merchandise. Under About BLM, the site offers this description of its mission and purpose. Quote, "We are expansive. We are a collective of liberators who believe in an inclusive and spacious movement. We must ensure we are building a movement that brings us all to the front. We affirm our humanity, our contributions to this society, and our resilience in the face of deadly oppression." Unquote. This statement captures how progressive identity politics expands the post-colonial colonizer versus colonized dichotomy into a broader, indeed global, oppressor versus oppressed dichotomy. Moreover, the oppressors are no longer specific nations and their policies. Rather, for BLM, the catch-all oppressor is what it calls white supremacy and those who enable it. As the mission statement says, this is not a national issue, but rather an international, borderless struggle for liberation. In other words, BLM globalizes post-colonialism. Yet, what is the precise meaning of white supremacy, and where is it located specifically? Despite a concrete history of actual white supremacists in the United States, like the Ku Klux Klan, and a legacy of laws that explicitly discriminated against Black people, like forcing them to sit on the back of the bus, attend different schools, and even drink from different water fountains, it's not easy to get a concrete answer to this question from the Black Lives Matter movement. The reason is because BLM has also adopted and modified the post-colonial insistence that epistemic authority belongs to the oppressed identity group and the oppressed identity group alone. Consequently, Black Lives Matter endows itself with the authority to define racism however it chooses, and that definition can shapeshift according to the group's political goals. A recent case helpfully crystallizes this form of thinking in action. In the winter of 2020, a black actor named Jussie Smollett claimed that he was the victim of a hate crime. He reported to the police and a sympathetic press, which made his story go viral very quickly, that two white men wearing red Make America Great Again hats jumped him in the middle of a frigid night on the streets of Chicago, beat him up, poured bleach over his head, and then placed a noose around his neck while shouting, "This is MAGA country." Despite the fantastical nature of his story, support from numerous celebrities and politicians immediately poured in, including from then presidential candidates Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who later became president and vice president, respectively. However, the Chicago police conducted a full investigation and not only found no evidence to support Smollett's claims, but also discovered that he had orchestrated the attack himself. Despite the Cook County prosecutor initially dropping the charges, the police were eventually able to get a new prosecutor to indict Smollett on filing a false police report, among other related counts. A full trial followed, during which the prosecution argued that Smollett had hired two Nigerian brothers to stage the attack with the hopes that it would be filmed by a nearby camera and become a national news story. Smollett was eventually found guilty by a jury and eventually spent some time in jail. Now, given the outlandish nature of the claims, it was highly probable from the moment the story first broke that Smollett's attack by white supremacists, it was fake. The trial process proved this initial conclusion beyond any reasonable doubt. Yet this is what the Black Lives Matter website has written about the trial and its outcome, a statement that also calls for the abolition of police. Quote, "This is not about a trial or a verdict decided in a white supremacist charade. It's about how we treat our community when corrupt systems are working to devalue their lives. In an abolitionist society, this trial would not be taking place, and our communities would not have to fight and suffer to prove our worth. Instead, we find ourselves once again being forced to put our lives and our value in the hands of judges and juries operating in a system that is designed to oppress us, while continuing to face a corrupt and violent police department, which has proven time and again to have no respect for our lives. In our commitment to abolition, we can never believe police, especially the Chicago Police Department, over Jussie Smollett, a black man who has been courageously present, visible, and vocal in the struggle for black freedom." Unquote. Now, this statement does not provide any evidence for its claim that the trial was defined by white supremacy. It does not provide any evidence that the police investigation was corrupt. It does not provide any evidence for how the system is, quote, designed to oppress us. Instead, it makes the sheer assertion that we can never believe the police over Jussie Smollett. In other words, we believe what we believe because we believe it, and that's the only explanation you will get. This is a paradigmatic example of the lived experience epistemology that defines both BLM and progressive ideology more generally. In a fusion of postmodernism, which says there is no objective truth and thus no objectively true description of events, and post-colonialism, which says that true knowledge is limited to the oppressed and their self-proclaimed representatives, progressivism destroys the possibility of objective truth with one hand and reconstitutes it in the image and likeness of an identity group's experiences with the other. This is, of course, self-contradictory. It is incoherent to deny the existence of objective truth out of one side of your mouth while claiming that one's experiences are true and should have universal moral authority out of the other. However, progressivism sees the maxims "try to be coherent" or "try not to contradict yourself," recall from the previous lecture, as particularist white forms of thinking that cannot and should not be applied to all groups. All that matters morally and politically is what the representative of the identity group says the group experiences, and the only standard of truth that can be applied to evaluate those experiences is the experiences themselves. It is an impossibly closed, self-justifying epistemic circle whose authority is impervious to anyone deemed outside the identity group. and the identity group has the full authority over who is in and who is outside that group. Thus, a student claiming she was the victim of racism because a janitor asked her why she was in a restricted area of campus is by definition a victim of racism, despite a 35-page report that finds zero evidence of discrimination. A teenage boy waiting for a bus after attending a pro-life rally in Washington, D.C., can become the viral face of white privilege and white supremacy merely by standing still as a Native American man without any provocation approaches and bangs a drum close to his face. Numerous members of a college lacrosse team can be accused of rape, publicly denounced by their own university, and persecuted by a corrupt local prosecutor despite there being easily accessible and completely exonerating evidence nearly from the moment the accusations were first made. These events, all of which became national news story in the United States, only had the traction they did because they were seen through the epistemic lens of progressive identitarian politics. If a member of a favored identity group says something is true, it must be true no matter what the facts are. Indeed, for progressivism, there is no such thing as a category of objective facts. It's all experience, all the time. Now, to be sure, none of this means that there are not, in fact, real hate crimes motivated by real prejudice. All of them should be thoroughly investigated and prosecuted to the full extent of the law if the evidence supports the accusation. Yet that's precisely the problem with progressive identitarian epistemology. Even asking for evidence is interpreted as a form of racism or homophobia or transphobia, etc. Indeed, this is one of the basic premises underlying the concept of white fragility. Robin DiAngelo, the white female author of a book entitled White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism, which has sold hundreds of thousands of copies, argues that white people who either deny they are racist or ask for evidence showing their racism are in these very acts proving that they are indeed racist. She writes, quote, "Habitus maintains our social comfort and helps us regain it when those around us do not act in familiar and acceptable ways. Thus, white fragility is a state in which even a minimum amount of racial stress in the habitus becomes intolerable, triggering a range of defensive moves." Unquote. Habitus for DiAngelo means the status quo for white people, namely not casually being accused of racism or of supporting a system of white supremacy. Responding to these accusations with statements like, no, I don't believe I'm a racist, or no, I do not believe that I am perpetuating systematic racism, or no, I don't believe that being colorblind is an idea that advances white supremacy, counts, from DiAngelo's point of view, as a defensive move that confirms your white fragility, which means that you are simply unwilling to recognize how racist you actually are. In other words, if you have pale skin and you deny that you are perpetuating systematic racism, the only reason you could possibly be doing so is because you are in denial, not because you have thought carefully about the proposition and find it to be false. DiAngelo thus offers her white readers two options. Either A, unquestionably accept everything that I am saying about you and thereby admit that you are in fact racist, or B, critically question what I am saying, that is, become defensive, and thereby demonstrate that you are in fact racist. It is precisely in this catch-22 that we see the progressive epistemic and moral pattern repeated once again. Heads I win, tails you lose. Setting aside the fact that DiAngelo has come under fire from many black individuals who find her to be, in the words of black academic John McWhorter, quote, a well-intentioned but tragically misguided pastor who teaches us how to be racist in a whole new way, unquote, the most important takeaway is to recognize how her ideas capture the progressive impulse adapted from post-colonialism to bestow true moral knowledge only on those who have had the right kind of experience. Now, in DiAngelo's case, she is a white woman and so cannot plausibly claim that she has the experience of people of color. Her relevant lived experience, however, the token that buys her moral authority on racial issues, is her work as a diversity trainer for businesses and organizations, teaching their white employees how to stop being racist, a job that has awakened her to just how big the problem is. So big, in fact, that it is everywhere all the time. As D'Angelo writes, quoting another thinker, quote, "Racism is a systemic, societal, institutional, omnipresent, and epistemologically embedded phenomenon that pervades every vestige of our reality." Unquote. D'Angelo can see this omnipresent evil. And to anyone with pale skin who agrees with her, she says, "Congratulations for admitting you're an out-of-the-closet racist who perpetuates a system of white supremacy." But if you happen to see things differently, if you happen to have an alternative view of the current nature of and solution to the problem of racial discrimination, D'Angelo offers this gentle advice. Read my book and take my course now before anyone begins suspecting that you don't believe that you personally are perpetuating white supremacy, which according to the experts is the most racist thing of all. Trust in your own reason and your own moral integrity at your own peril. This dimension of progressive ideology, possessing a distinctive set of morally authoritative experiences or recognizing others' morally authoritative experiences, that is, being an ally, also helps explain the relationship between progressivism and being woke. Although the term has a complex history and contested contemporary uses, it captures a basic disposition to morality and politics that has its roots in the progressive adaptation of post-colonial epistemology. As we see from both the Black Lives Matter website and the writings of Robin DiAngelo, being woke does not just mean paying attention. It means seeing things from the perspective of those who have deemed themselves to be morally authoritative on questions of morality and politics and not asking any questions. For example, those who look at everything from the premise, as DiAngelo has asserted, that racism is the foundation to the society we are in, are awake. They see things the right way. That is, everything around you is racist except the people who are telling you that everything around you is racist. Conversely, those who do not see things this way are morally and politically asleep, and therefore blind to the true nature of moral and political reality. Again, this may sound like a contradiction. If there's no such thing as universally objective moral truth, then how could one identity group's description of morality be seen as any more authoritative than any other description? But if you are thinking those thoughts, that just means you're not woke enough. In sum, to be woke means to stop asking questions like, what is actually going on here? Or, is anything I'm being told actually true? And to start asking questions like, what is the most efficient way for the identity group to get what it wants? In other words, being woke means anesthetizing your inner, critically thinking philosopher while supplying your inner political strategist with a steady stream of morally sanctifying, self-justifying Red Bull. You will never rest again. In the next lecture, I'll provide a summary of the argument up to this point and explain how all the widely disparate strands of progressivism, wokeism find a tenuous but politically powerful unity in the concept of intersectionality. See you next time.